I'm reading out of A Return to Elysium. It is a Joan Grant farm memory book playing in the 2nd century BC, and this is her life as Lucina. She is on an island, this island of Elysium, and she's being mentored. We are now in chapter 10, I think, entitled The SEER. And I'm just looking whether it was a 10 or 11th chapter. The SEER. She is doing an experiment with Asclepius, chapter 11, regarding healing people in the next room, which is something he wants to investigate. So they've had their first patient, and he is telling her what she was talking about whilst she was asleep, because he was watching her. Not yet, I admitted frankly. I can remember enough for tonight. Tomorrow it will be only words, but now it might be more. Too uncomfortable. Good. Already you are learning a new kind of courage, which is secure, because it dare admit fear instead of having to pretend it doesn't exist. I'm learning it too. For I have never found anything more difficult than letting you go on, when I so profoundly wanted to stop you. What you experienced was horrific, even at second hand, and I could only watch and recognize my helplessness. You would have known my feelings when you saw me writing. It looks like the prowling of a drunken beetle instead of the precise marks of cold reason. I shall have to make a fair copy to send to our friend in Athens. We laughed together and filled our wine cups before he went on speaking. When the rain began, it was only very ordinary rain, but audible, because the night was still. The woman in the next room began to moan. I thought she would disturb you, though you seemed to have fallen asleep. The moans grew louder, and though I knew she would not wake, I went in to see if she were ill. The symptoms from which she suffered were immediately obvious. She was fighting for breath. Her face suffused, her mouth gaping open as she struggled for air. If I had not seen several patients of my own with the same affliction, I should have thought her in grave danger, or if I had believed in demons, I might have considered that she was being strangled. It is an affliction which occurs in both men and women, less frequently in children. So far as I know, there is no cure, though sleep drinks help to alleviate the condition. That was one of the curious factors. She had this sudden attack while deeply asleep, and there was no physical damage to the nose or lungs, for when the attack passed, she breathed without any difficulty. I was sufficiently anxious about her to leave the door open. As the tempo of your experience heightened, so did her struggles become more desperate. When you heard the voice which spoke of the pool of clear water, there was a sudden silence. I ran to her. I thought her heart had stopped, but I should find a dead woman on the bed. She was breathing slowly, deep breaths, as a runner makes when he has reached his goal. I had not heard this reassuring noise because the contrast was so great between this ordinary rhythm and the previous agony. He smiled, and I think my hearing was less than normally acute because of the sound of my heart. It was thudding in a manner most disquieting to one who prides himself on being free of undignified emotions. She was being drowned in the mud. Her body, this body I mean, remembered what had happened. Have you any idea whether her fear came from an accident in early childhood? For instance, was she the child and the woman a nurse? You said the woman knew it was not her own child. There may have been a storm of unusual severity. You said the mud was very deep. The child fell into the mud and thought it was being smothered. An experience of that severity would be enough to cause permanent damage to the mind, the fear remaining latent except when brought to the surface by a catalyst, such as the rain tonight provided. I don't know, Asclepius. This was different to the sword. I felt that Agamemnon was the man in the banqueting hall. I could even guess at the time it happened, 2 or 3 centuries ago. It was I, Lucina, who took the sword and gave it to him. But this time, though I was so close to the woman that I experienced her fear and could feel the mud, I know it didn't happen to me. I was in 2 places at once, inside her mind and still thinking with my own. It was like dreaming another person's dream. Real and yet in a sense impersonal, I knew I could stop knowing about her, and you can never stop knowing about yourself. I was she and not she. Myself and more than myself. I'm too sleepy to be intelligent about it, but at least we know that something happened. Yes, said Asclepius, I really know that something happened, and for the first time I hope to live to a great age, so that we shall be able to discover the country to which this is one of the roads. We deliberately spent the next day being very ordinary. There was an old spade and a sickle with a broken handle in the shed, and we worked in the garden, cutting dead wood from the bushes, digging up nettles that were choking the remaining flowers, as though we were desperate to get the ground clean for a sowing on which our security depended. Neither of us felt hungry, but in the late afternoon we lit a fire to boil some eggs and ate them with bread and goat's cheese. We sat outside watching the colours of the setting sun fade from the sky until we heard someone approaching along the main road. Asclepius walked to the end of the rough terrace, which still supported a few neglected vines. It is only a man driving a pack donkey, he said, but I can see a litter coming over the crest of the hill. We had better go indoors. How are you feeling, Lucina? I can tell them to turn back if you're too tired to try again tonight. I'm feeling very well. I'm not at all worried, I said, and wished it were true. I lay down beside the cold hearth we had lit, the cooking fire in the garden, for both of us had felt inclined to stay in the open, and waited to hear departing footsteps and the thud of a door closing. Tonight the hinges did not creak, for we had oiled them. Again a procession of trivial thoughts passed across the surface of my mind. Clear, precise pictures which were easy to recognize but seemed without significance. Euripides tying his manuscripts with coloured ribbons and putting them away in the box made for him by Praxiteles in the form of a child's sarcophagus. Myself packing my mother's clothes in the painted chest, being so careful to replace each pleat as I had found it. Epicurus counting the tallies in the storeroom. I can't see anything important, I said. A lot of irrelevant ideas keep coming into my mind. I try to keep them out, for they don't mean anything. Describe them to me. Don't worry if you can't see any significance. Pretend it is the memory of a dream. We have often discovered that a small, seemingly unimportant detail is the clue to the labyrinth. I did as he told me, expecting that he would share my disappointment. There is no clue, I said. All these images are ordinary memories of things which I know have happened. You recognize no similarity? I paused and then admitted I could not see any connecting thread. Each of them has one factor in common. They are symbols of personal treasure, the treasure which represents security. Of course, how stupid of me not to see it. Follow the clue, Lucina. Let the pictures form without any conscious effort, and describe them to me as they occur. Ask yourself, if the patient has a treasure he jealously guards. Don't talk any more, I said quickly. I have just realized there was another picture which kept on forming behind the others, but it was difficult to see clearly. It was like faded fresco on which another has been painted in much brighter pigments. Look at the faded picture. Look at it, Lucina. There's a man, an old man, very thin. He is shut in a room without windows. There are sacks all around him, leather sacks, I think. Their mouths are closed with thongs tied very tightly and sealed with purple wax. He is very hungry. There must be food in the sacks, for he is trying to break the thongs. The wax is hard as metal, for his fingers bleed when he tries to break the seal. Someone has come into the room. I cannot see whether it is a man or a woman. I can only see a right hand holding a knife. The knife would slit the sacks, but the old man won't look at it. He pretends it isn't there. I can't hear anything, but I know someone is telling him to take the knife and slit open the sacks. Why won't he take the knife? Why, Lucina? Because he thinks that if he lets anyone help him, he will have to share the food. There's a lot of food, but he believes there's only just enough to save him from starvation. He thinks there is only one sack, but there are many, so very many. He has only just enough space to move between them. He said there was no window in the room, but there is a window. It's hidden by the sacks. Can you tell him to escape through the window? He won't listen. I've tried to tell him, but he won't listen. He thinks I'm a thief who has come to steal. He thinks everyone is a thief. Then the picture faded. There was only the white ash on the hearth, Asclepius writing down the last words. I had used the lamp, making us great with shadows on the wall. I felt ordinary and rather silly, as though I had been inventing a story to amuse Euripides. And it wasn't even an interesting story. No proper ending, no drama. I wasn't cold or tired. There was nothing to show, even to myself, that anything, even a little odd, had happened. I'm sorry, I said. I tried, but that was all I could see, and it's very unimportant. Then I remembered how hungry the old man had looked, the way the ribs showed through the torn tunic, the broken nails which had tried to force the wax seals. It may not be unimportant to him, I said. He may be a beggar who is too old even to beg. At least we can give him food and somewhere to sleep. I think it was cruel to send a starving man here when all he needed was work or a little charity. If he is a slave, will you buy him? Even if he is useless, we could let him work in the garden. There must be something he could do to earn enough to stop himself being so terribly afraid of hunger. Has anyone been turned away from Elysium? Of course I will buy him and give him his freedom. I have never found it more easy to be the skillful physician, for no disease is more readily cured than hunger, if you have food to give away. I laughed. A few moments ago I thought that I hadn't found out anything. We don't even know if it's a man or a woman. Yet we are already certain that he is a man, and old and hungry. We have almost decided exactly how much his freedom will cost, and what kind of work will suit him. It's easy to prove, he said, and taking the lamp we walked towards the door. The man, at least it was a man and not a woman, or a child, slept quietly, his hands folded on his chest. But they were not the hands of a slave. They were sleek with unguents, the nails carefully tended. The beard was curled and perfumed with ambergris. The grey hair glossy, parted above a broad forehead. The body had cause to remember many years of rich food. I said, if he is a slave, then his master must be a paragon. If he is old and close to starvation, then I'm a foreign wrestler with a broken nose. I never had great cause to be grateful to Asclepius than during the following day. He understood how foolish I was feeling, but he gave no sign that we had any reason to be disturbed. We took food with us and went far up the mountain, talking of things which had no bearings on my failure. We collected several uncommon flowers to bring back to plant in the garden. We chose wild herbs for the stew I made for the evening meal, with a care which Epicurus would have given to a banquet. At least I was prepared for another disappointment, and so was able to conceal something of what it meant to me. For hours I tried to produce some effect, even a fleeting idea which could be translated into a symbolic meaning would have been as a healing ointment. But nothing happened. I was only Lucina, who could think of nothing except that she was betraying Asclepius and herself. When I had to admit that there was no use any longer, we went to look at the third patient. He was a young man lying peacefully on his side with his right hand under his cheek. I was too dispirited and too tired even to wonder why a diseased mind should be contained in so healthy a body. I had gone to bed before the bearers came to take him away. I was so miserable that I should have been glad if they had come to carry me to my funeral, for a corpse is spared the humiliation of failure. I knew the fourth ordeal was a woman, for she cried out when she was carried into the house. There was fear in the sound, which blurred into a mutter of unintelligible words before the silence crept back. I lay down as I had done before, and tried to hold a state between sleeping and waking. I was no longer bowed with a sense of inevitable failure. I almost hoped that nothing would happen. Asclepius knew I was afraid. It's not unusual to talk under the influence of lethe. Do not let yourself be disturbed, Lucina. You would not be afraid to hear someone mutter if he were deep in wine. This is no more important. His voice was calm, yet I think he shared my unease. It was suddenly intolerable to lie on the floor, to try to become a placid mirror in which the mind of someone else could be reflected. It was urgent that I remained Lucina. Only as my inviolate self could I find strength. The strength I needed was not to be found in the concept of a different personality. I must search for it from the centre, from a hidden source of life which as yet I had only dimly recognized. I must act according to the dictates of that spring of clear water. Let it flow freely, the course not misdirected by logic or preconceived ideas. Yet logic was needed too, the precise judgment, the complete mastery of fear, by which alone this current could find the free waters of the sea beyond the sea. I stood up and walked slowly across the room to unbar the shutters. The moon, was full. Let me see myself in the moon. I could hear my voice as though it belonged to someone I had once known and loved. By the light of the moon let me challenge the darkness. I was no longer uncertain. What I must do was clear and precise as the pattern of a ritual dance. Each step, each movement was defined to be allowed with meticulous exactness. Yet I knew only the next step, the immediate gesture. I could not tell where the pattern was leading me. I went to the cupboard in the wall. I did so with the assurance of instinct, and yet I could feel the texture of the woolen curtains and the smooth surface of pottery as I took down the flask of wine. The bread broke easily, and in my right hand I took a small portion. The salt was in a stone jar. I sprinkled some on the bread and the sword and the shield. I was no longer without armor. The latch of the door was familiar as the hilt of a sword. The screams which I could hear were only the turmoil of battle, familiar to the soldier. The room was dark, but in the light which came through the door I had opened, I could see the dark shape of a body, contorted on the bed. I placed the bread and sword at her head, the flask of wine at her feet. The soldier puts those for whom he joins battle in a safe fortress before he gives challenge to the enemy. The herald must know the name of the enemy. I knew the name. Bast! In the challenge there was a sound of trumpets by which chariots are unleashed as hounds on a dark quarry. Bast is the cat of Sekhmet, a whipped cur who is afraid to show her face to me, the daughter of the moon. The enemy came forth from the window, a woman with the head of a cat, the claws of a cat, a woman strong with youth, imperishably old. Accept my challenge or let your slave go free. I knew for whom I fought, a girl younger than Lucina, who in fear had dedicated her spirit to the service of evil. The claws hands of Bast stretched out towards me, curved for my throat. I could feel the thick dark fur, soft and impenetrable under my hands. The life of the cat or the life of the moon? And the voice of Bast answered, I accept no freedom at your hands. There can be nothing except death between us. Choose freedom. Choose in the name of Ptah. Bast does not give up her slaves. By the power of Ptah I conquer. The claws tore at my throat. I felt blood pouring down my face, drenching my body until it was wet as the sweat of death. Ptah, protect me. There was strength in my hands, memory in my fingers. The goat of Pan had fled from the child on the mountain. I would conquer by the light of older victories. My hands were drawing closer together, closer on that throat which tried to utter names of immemorial evil. I was alone in the room, save for a woman who was no longer a prisoner of the dark. I took the bread and moistened it with wine. The woman was lying as though death had brought her the only peace. I opened her mouth and put the sop of salted bread and wine on her tongue. She opened her eyes. I will not again betray the salt, she said. I will not again betray the salt. Asclepius stood at the foot of the bed, holding the lamp high so its light filled the room. The woman was very old. Sparse white hair fell in disorder around a face which time had treated without kindliness. She lifted her hand, the hand of a woman who had never been spared the lowest forms of toil. She stared at it, and a tear crawled down a wrinkled course. I had forgotten that I am old, she said. I had forgotten the slave market, the quays of Alexandria, the stews of foreign cities. I could only remember the girl who was born in the island beyond Delos, the girl who had never seen a cat. Then she looked up at me. But I am no longer afraid to be old, for I know that my grave will not be defiled by the cats who have come in their hundreds to remind me that their patience was infinite. She lay back on the pillow and, smiling, fell asleep. It was only then I saw the look on the face of Asclepius. There was horror and compassion in his eyes. He saw that my tunic was splashed with blood, so the cat had torn my face. I had felt its claws driving into my throat. "No," he said, "your throat is not wounded. Your nose bled. It's not unusual for the nose to bleed under the stress of powerful emotion." "Then why are you frightened for me?" "Because I don't understand. I don't understand. You were in danger, Lucina. Terrible danger. I thought I had driven you insane." "Asclepius, for the first time in my life I am secure in my sanity. I no longer have to fight for my certainty that there are more things under the sun than have yet been recognized by philosophers. I know." So the next chapter is entitled Escapist. It is Friday today, the 10th of November.